The wagon wheels churned through the spring mud as Cora Jane Ellison stepped down onto the main street of Dry Hollow. The driver didn't wait for a thank you, just clicked his tongue at the horses and moved on, leaving her standing there with her single carpet bag and the weight of 3 states' worth of dust on her shoulders. "I didn't choose this place because it was warm," she would tell herself later that night. "I chose it because nobody asked how tall I was." The truth was simpler. She'd run out of money in Kansas City. And this was as far west as $20 and a stern Presbyterian upbringing would take her. Dry Hollow wasn't much to look at. A general store with boards warping in the heat, a saloon that leaked piano music like a broken music box, and a church whose white paint had long since surrendered to the prairie wind. The kind of town that existed because the railroad needed water stops, not because anyone dreamed of building a life here. Cora adjusted her traveling coat, a man's coat, because nothing in the ladies' departments of St. Louis ever fit her shoulders, and walked toward the general store. Her boots, also men's, size 11, squelched in the mud. Back in Missouri, her former fiancé, Theodore, had called them unseemly. He'd called a lot of things about her unseemly, right up until he'd called off their engagement in front of his mother's entire Tuesday prayer circle. "Not feminine enough," he'd said, as if femininity could be measured like flour at the mercantile. The bell above the store door barely managed a tinkle as she entered. Behind the counter stood a woman with steel-gray hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of suspicion. "Help you?" The woman's eyes traveled up to meet Cora's face, and her mouth pursed like she'd bitten into a lemon. "I'm looking for lodging," Cora said. "A boarding house, perhaps." The woman snorted. "Mrs. Pemberton runs the only respectable establishment, but she's full up. Been full up since the railroad crew came through last month." Her eyes narrowed. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." "Husband dead." "No husband." The silence stretched between them like taffy. "Finally," the woman shrugged. "Might try the saloon. Sometimes Big Jake lets folks sleep in the back room if they're desperate enough." Cora's jaw tightened. She'd slept in enough back rooms on her journey west to know what that usually meant. Propositions whispered through thin walls, hands that tried door handles in the night. "Thank you, but no." She left without buying anything, though her stomach had been empty since yesterday's breakfast. The sun was settling into the horizon like a tired old man into his chair by the time Cora had walked the length of Main Street 3 times. No boarding house with rooms to spare. No family willing to take in a boarder who towered over their husbands. Even the hotel, a generous term for a building that looked like it might fold in on itself in a strong wind, had turned her away. "Bad for business," the proprietor had muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. "Ladies traveling alone. Gives people ideas." What ideas, exactly? A woman of her height and singular appearance might inspire. He didn't elaborate on. As darkness crept across the prairie, Cora found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. A ranch spread out before her, its boundaries marked by posts and wire that disappeared into the gathering dusk. Near the main road sat an old barn, doors hanging open like a broken jaw. Hay bales were stacked inside, visible in the last light. Not ideal, but better than the alternatives. She'd slept in worse places since leaving Missouri. A root cellar in Independence, a chicken coop outside Topeka. That memorable night under a farm wagon when the rain came down so hard she thought she might drown lying on her back. The barn smelled of old hay and older wood, with that underlying scent of livestock long since moved to other pastures. Cora found a corner where the hay was still relatively fresh, spread her coat on the ground, and used her carpetbag as a pillow. Through the gaps in the barn walls, she could see the ranch house in the distance, windows glowing yellow with lamplight. A home. Someone else's home. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she ignored it. Tomorrow she'd find work. A town this size always needed seamstresses, cooks, someone to mind children or tend gardens. She had 2 good hands and a strong back. even if they came attached to a frame that made most men uncomfortable and most women suspicious. The wind picked up, whistling through the barn boards and bringing with it the scent of coming rain. Cora pulled her coat tighter and closed her eyes. She'd learned not to cry anymore. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, like new boots or the belief that somewhere might be different. Not feminine enough. Theodore's voice echoed in her memory. His mother had nodded along. All the church ladies had nodded along, like a row of flowers bending in the same wind. A man needs to feel like a man. Mrs. Hartwell had added, patting Cora's hand with fingers that felt like dried leaves. And how can he when his wife could look him eye to eye, when she could likely carry him across the threshold instead of the other way around? They'd laughed then, all of them. That tittering laugh of women who'd never had to sleep in a barn or wonder if their height was the only thing standing between them and a normal life. Cora had stopped wondering that somewhere around the Kansas border, normal was for women who topped out at 5'4", who could buy dresses off the rack and dance without leading, who could sit in a church pew without their knees hitting the bench in front. Normal was for women whose mothers hadn't died birthing them, leaving behind a daughter who grew like a prairie weed, tall and strong and unwanted. The first drops of rain began pattering on the barn roof, and Cora shifted deeper into her hay corner. At least the roof seemed solid. At least she was out of sight of the good people of Dry Hollow, who would no doubt have opinions about a woman sleeping in a barn like livestock. She dozed fitfully, waking every time the wind gusted harder or an unfamiliar sound broke through the rain's rhythm. It might have been midnight, hard to tell without church bells or a watch, when she heard footsteps approaching. Not the casual step of someone passing by, but deliberate movement coming closer to the barn. Cora's hand found the small knife she kept in her boot. Another lesson learned on the road height might discourage some men, but desperation or drink could make others bold. The footsteps stopped just outside. She held her breath, knife ready, muscles tense to spring up if needed. The barn door, already ajar, creaked open wider. Light spilled in lamplight, warm and yellow, held by a large figure silhouetted in the doorway. The man was tall, taller than her, which was rare enough to notice. Broad shoulders that filled the doorframe, but he moved with the careful quiet of someone who understood his own size. He held the lamp high, scanning the barn's interior until the light found her corner. They stared at each other across the dusty space. Cora's grip on the knife didn't loosen. She'd learned to read men's faces quickly, to spot the difference between curiosity and threat, between surprise and anger. This man's face showed neither, just a kind of tired recognition, like he'd found exactly what he'd expected to find. He had the weathered look of someone who worked outside sun lines around dark eyes, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days, hands scarred from rope and wire, and all the 100 ways a ranch could mark a man. "Evening," he said finally. His voice was low, careful, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "Saw someone heading into my barn earlier. Figured I should check if they were planning to steal my horses or just borrow my hay." "Just the hay?" Cora managed. "I'll be gone by morning." He studied her for a long moment, taking in the men's coat, the muddy boots, the carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. "Have you eaten?" The question surprised her. In all her nights of being discovered in places she shouldn't be, no one had ever asked that. They'd asked what she was doing there, told her to move along, threatened to call the sheriff, but never about food. "I'm fine," she said. "That wasn't what I asked." They stood at an impasse, the lamplight wavering between them. Finally, he set the lamp down on a barrel near the door and stepped back, hands visible and empty. "There's stew on the stove, still warm. You can eat and then come back here if you prefer the hay to a proper bed. But you should eat." "I don't need charity." Didn't say you did, but my mother would rise from her grave and box my ears if she knew I let someone go hungry on my land." He turned to go, then paused. "Ranch house is the yellow light, back door's open." Then he was gone. Leaving the lamp behind, Cora sat in her hay corner, knife still in her hand, stomach cramping with a hunger that had moved past pain into a kind of hollow ache. The smart thing would be to stay put, leave before dawn, never find out if his offer was genuine or came with expectations. But the lamp sat there like an invitation written in light, and the rain was coming down harder now. And she was so very tired of being smart and careful and alone. She stood slowly, joints protesting after hours on the ground, and made her way to the barn door. The ranch house wasn't far, maybe 50 yards through the rain. She could see the yellow windows more clearly now, could imagine the warmth inside. Just food, she told herself. Just this once. The rain fell harder as Cora made her way across the muddy yard, each step a small battle against the sucking earth. The lamp he'd left behind threw wild shadows as she carried it, making the familiar act of walking feel strange and uncertain. By the time she reached the back door of the ranch house, her boots were caked with mud and her coat soaked through at the shoulders. She stood there for a moment, rain streaming down her face, wondering if this was a mistake. Through the window beside the door, she could see into a kitchen clean, orderly, with copper pots hanging from hooks and a stove that radiated warmth even from here. It looked like the kind of kitchen her mother might have had, if her mother had lived long enough to have a kitchen. The door was indeed open, just as he'd said, not wide open, that would be foolish, but unlatched, so that a gentle push would swing it inward. Cora knocked anyway, 3 sharp raps that seemed too loud in the night. "It's open," came the voice from inside. Matter of fact, like he'd been expecting her knock. She pushed through, bringing a gust of rain and wind with her, and quickly shut the door behind her. The warmth hit her like a physical thing, making her realize just how cold she'd been. The kitchen smelled of beef stew and coffee and wood smoke, the smells of home, of belonging, of all the things she'd left behind in Missouri. The man stood by the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. He'd removed his hat and coat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and a flannel shirt worn soft with age. He moved around his kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been taking care of himself for a long time. "Boots," he said without turning around. "There's a boot jack by the door. Floor's hard enough to keep clean without mud." It was such a normal thing to say, such a practical concern, that Cora found herself obeying without question. She struggled with the boots they'd swollen with rain, and he turned at the sound of her difficulty. "Here." He set the bowl down and crossed to her in 3 strides, kneeling without hesitation. "Foot up." "I can manage." "I'm sure you can, but you're dripping on my floor while you do it." There was something almost humorous in his tone, and Cora found herself lifting her foot. He worked the boot off with practiced efficiency, then the other, setting them neatly by the door. His hands were careful, impersonal, the way they might be when tending to a horse's hoof. "Socks, too," he said, straightening. "They're soaked through. There's a pair of wool ones in that drawer by the window. They'll be too big, but they're warm." He turned back to the stove, giving her privacy to change her socks. The wool ones were indeed too big, clearly his, but they were dry and warm and felt like heaven against her frozen feet. "Sit," he said, setting the bowl on the table along with a spoon and a thick slice of bread. "Coffee?" Yes, please." She sat carefully, aware of how she must look, hair plastered to her head, men's clothes sodden with rain, feet swimming in borrowed socks. But he didn't seem to notice or care, just poured coffee into a heavy mug and set it before her. The first spoonful of stew nearly made her cry. It was simple fare, beef and potatoes and carrots, but it was hot and filling, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of his eyes on her as he leaned against the counter with his own cup of coffee. "Passing through or staying?" he asked after she'd gotten through half the bowl. "Looking for work." The words came out rougher than she'd intended. "I can sew, cook, clean. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Didn't think you were." He sipped his coffee. "Takes a certain kind of person to sleep in a barn rather than other places." She looked up sharply, But there was no judgment in his face, just understanding. Maybe, like he knew exactly what other places a woman alone might be offered and why she might choose hay and cold over them. "Your barn seemed safer," she said. "It is." Simple agreement. "Though the house would be safer still. There's a room off the kitchen used to be the housekeeper's. Beds made up. Door locks from the inside." Cora's hand stilled on the spoon. "What's the price?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "No price. The room's empty. You need a place to sleep. That's all." "Men don't usually." She stopped, started again. "In my experience, generosity comes with expectations." "Fair enough." He refilled her coffee without asking. "Let me put it this way. I need help around here. Can't keep up with the house and the ranch both. And I'm tired of eating my own cooking. You need work and a place to stay. Seems like we could help each other out without any expectations. As you put it, you can start tomorrow. See how it goes. If it doesn't suit, you're free to leave." "And if someone comes looking for me—" His eyes sharpened. "Someone likely to—" "No." She met his gaze steadily. "No one's looking for me." "Then I don't see a problem." He pushed off from the counter. "Name's Sawyer McKinley. This is the Double Bar Ranch. Been in my family since before the war. Cora Jane Ellison." It felt strange to say her full name aloud. She'd been thinking of herself as just Cora for so long, as if cutting away parts of her name could make her smaller, less noticeable. "Miss Ellison." He nodded, formal now. "The room's through that door. There's water in the pitcher, towels in the drawer. Breakfast is at sunrise earlier if you want to help with the cooking." He started to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. I don't hold with gossip, but folks in town will talk when they hear I've got a woman staying here. I can't stop them talking, but I can make sure they know you're here as hired help. Proper and respectable. That matter to you." "Yes," she admitted. "It matters." "Then we understand each other." He picked up his hat from a peg by the door. "I'll be checking the stock. Sometimes the storm spooks them. The lamp's yours for the night." And then he was gone, back out into the rain, leaving Cora alone in the warm kitchen with her half-empty bowl and racing thoughts. She finished the stew slowly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A job, a room, a locked door offered as simply as the coffee, with no visible strings attached. She knew better than to trust easily. The road from Missouri had taught her that kindness often came with a cost, that men who seemed decent in lamplight could turn grasping in darkness. But there was something about Sawyer McKinley, the way he'd knelt to help with her boots without making her feel small, the way he'd offered the room while already moving toward the door, as if her acceptance was assumed but her privacy assured. The room, when she finally worked up the courage to look, was small but clean. A narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a washstand with the promised pitcher and towels, a small window with cotton curtains. The door did indeed lock from the inside, a proper lock, not just a latch. She tested it twice before believing it. Cora sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her damp clothes, and tried to remember the last time she'd slept in a real bed. Kansas City. Maybe that boarding house where the landlady had asked her to leave after the other female boarders complained they felt intimidated by her presence. Or was it Topeka? That one night in a hotel before her money ran too low. Through the window, she could see a figure moving near the barn. Sawyer, checking his stock as promised. The lamp in his hand bobbed like a firefly as he moved between the buildings. A man who went out in a storm to check on horses, who left his door unlatched for a stranger, who offered work without first asking why a woman was sleeping in his barn. She should be suspicious. Experience had taught her to be suspicious, but she was so tired, and the bed was so soft, and the door locked from the inside. Cora changed out of her wet clothes, hanging them carefully on the pegs by the door. The nightgown from her carpet bag was wrinkled but dry. She washed her face and hands in the basin, the water cold but clean, and for the first time in weeks felt almost human. The bed creaked as she lay down. and she tensed, waiting. But no footsteps came down the hall. No hand tried the door handle, just the sound of rain on the roof and, distantly, the creak of the back door as Sawyer returned from his rounds. She heard him moving in the kitchen, the quiet sounds of a man putting things away, banking the stove for the night, then footsteps heading away, toward what must be his own room in another part of the house. Then nothing but rain and wind and the occasional pop of settling wood. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Cora fell asleep without her hand on her knife. She woke before dawn, habit pulling her from sleep even though no one was shouting for her to move along. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was: the bed too soft, the room too warm. Then it came back: Sawyer McKinley, the Double Bar Ranch, a job that might or might not be real in the morning light. She dressed quickly in her other set of clothes, also men's, also practical, but at least dry. Her wet things from last night were still damp, so she left them hanging. The house was quiet as she made her way to the kitchen, but a lamp was already burning low on the table, and the stove had been stoked back to life. Coffee was already made, and beside the pot sat a note in careful handwriting. Gone to 10 stock, back by full light. Make yourself at home. S.M. Make herself at home. As if it were that simple. As if home was something you could just decide to do, like making breakfast or mending a fence. But she could make breakfast. That much she knew how to do. Cora found eggs in the cold box, bacon in the pantry, flour and lard for biscuits. She worked quietly, efficiently, the way she'd learned in other women's kitchens where her height made her conspicuous and her silence made her tolerable. By the time Sawyer returned, stamping mud from his boots on the porch, she had breakfast waiting: biscuits golden from the oven, bacon crisp but not burned, eggs ready to fry when he sat down, coffee fresh and hot. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the spread on his table. Something passed across his face: surprise, maybe, or a kind of recognition. "Haven't had a breakfast like this in years," he said finally. "It's just food," Cora said, turning back to the stove. "Nothing fancy." "Sometimes just food is fancy enough." He washed his hands at the pump by the door, then sat at the table. "How'd you sleep?" "Well, thank you." "Good. We can talk about wages after we eat. Fair warning, I can't pay much. Ranch does all right, but nothing extra. Room and board and a little besides." "That's more than I had yesterday." He studied her over his coffee cup. "Where were you headed when you stopped here?" "West," she said, which was true enough. "Away. Sometimes that's the best direction." He didn't push for more, just accepted the plate she set before him and ate with the focus of a man who'd been up working since before dawn. They ate in companionable silence, and Cora felt something inside her chest begin to unknot. Just a little. Just enough to breathe. The morning sun painted the kitchen walls gold as Sawyer pushed his empty plate back, a satisfied sound escaping him. Been living on burned beans and bitter coffee so long I'd forgotten food could taste like something. Cora cleared the dishes, uncomfortable with the praise. "About the work, what exactly needs doing?" "Everything," he said honestly. "House hasn't been properly kept since my mother passed 4 winters ago. Tried hiring help from town, but," he shrugged. "Small-town folks have opinions about bachelor ranchers." She understood what he wasn't saying. A single man, living alone. Hiring women from town, the gossip would write itself. "And my reputation's already compromised by being here." "That's one way to look at it." He stood, stretching muscles that had been working since before dawn. "Other way is that you're new here, unknown. Clean slate. If you want it." He moved to a drawer near the window, pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. "Speaking of which, I need shirts mended, and these leather straps on the horse tack are starting to split. Can you work leather?" Cora examined the torn leather, running her fingers along the breaks. "I can. Learned from my uncle back in Missouri. He was a saddle maker." "Good. There's a whole pile of tack that needs attention before spring roundup." He gestured toward the window. Tack room's in the barn, but you can bring the work here to the kitchen where it's warm. I'll be out checking fence lines today. Storm probably took down a section or two. After he left, Cora stood alone in the kitchen, trying to orient herself to this strange new reality. She had a job, a room, a door that locked. It felt too easy, too simple, like a trap that hadn't sprung yet. But work was work, and she'd always been better at doing than thinking. She spent the morning exploring the house, not snooping, just learning where things were kept. The kitchen she already knew. Beyond it, a sitting room with furniture covered in dust sheets, a narrow hallway leading to what must be bedrooms. She didn't venture there. Her world was the kitchen, her small room, and whatever workspaces Sawyer designated. The tack room, when she found it, was a leather-scented cave of broken straps, cracked reins, and saddles that hadn't seen oil in months. She gathered what she could carry and brought it back to the kitchen, spreading her work on the table where the light was good. The rhythm of the work settled her needle through leather. Pull tight, not secure. Her hands remembered the motion even if her heart was still learning to trust this place. By noon, she had 3 bridles repaired and was starting on a saddle strap when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Sawyer returning, but not alone. Another man rode beside him, older, grizzled, with the bow-legged stance of someone who'd spent more time in a saddle than out of it. They were talking as they dismounted, and Cora caught fragments through the glass. Told you I handled it. Folks in town are already talking. None of their damn business. The door opened and both men entered, bringing the smell of horses and spring air with them. The older man stopped short when he saw her, his weathered face cycling through surprise, curiosity, and something like understanding. Tom, this is Miss Ellison. She's helping with the house and tack repair. Miss Ellison, Tom Garrett, he's got the spread north of here. Tom touched his hat brim. Ma'am. His eyes took in the leatherwork spread on the table, the neat stitches she'd already completed. Fine work there. Haven't seen stitching that clean since old Weber died. Thank you. Cora kept her eyes on her work, needle moving steadily. Tom's been telling me I need help around here for years, Sawyer said, pouring coffee for both men. Guess I finally listened. About time. Tom accepted the coffee gratefully. Place was starting to look like a bachelor's cave. No offense meant. None taken, Sawyer said dryly. You staying for lunch? Can't. Promised Mary I'd be back. She's got the minister coming to dinner and wants me presentable. He drained his coffee in one long swallow. But I'll spread the word in town that you've hired proper help. Might quiet some of the busybodies. After Tom left, Sawyer stood by the window, looking out at something Cora couldn't see. Tom's a good man. His word carries weight in town. Should make things easier for you. I can handle whispers, Cora said. I'm sure you can, but no reason you should have to if it can be helped. He turned from the window. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. There's fixings for sandwiches in the pantry for lunch. The afternoon passed quietly. Cora worked her way through the pile of leather, stopping only to make a simple lunch that Sawyer ate standing up, already thinking about his next task. He had the distracted air of a man with too much work and too little time, but he paused long enough to examine her repairs. This is good work, better than good. He held up a bridle, testing the strength of her stitches. Where'd you say you learned this? My uncle. He took me in after my mother died. I was 12. She didn't add that she'd already been taller than him, that he'd put her to work in his shop because she couldn't fit properly in his wife's kitchen, that she'd learned leatherwork the way she'd learned everything else, by being too big for the spaces girls were supposed to occupy. Useful skill to have. He hung the bridle on a peg by the door. I've got a saddle that needs complete restitching if you're up for it. My grandfather's saddle. Been meaning to restore it for years. I can look at it. Tomorrow's soon enough. Sun's getting low, might want to think about supper. It was a gentle reminder of her duties, but Cora was already planning the meal in her head. She'd noticed a smokehouse out back, seen preserved vegetables in the pantry, A man who worked as hard as Sawyer needed substantial food, not the quick sandwiches of lunch. She made a hash of smoked meat and potatoes, seasoned with onions and the herbs she'd found drying in bundles by the window. Simple food, filling food, the kind her uncle's wife had taught her to make. Grudgingly. For the workers who came to the saddle shop. Sawyer came in as she was setting the table, and again that look of surprise crossed his face. "You don't need to fuss." "It's not fussing, it's supper." They ate in comfortable quiet, and Cora noticed how he sat tired but not slumped, alert even in rest. A man used to being alone, but not lonely, or maybe just good at hiding the loneliness. "I'll be going to town tomorrow," he said as she cleared the plates. "Need supplies. Anything you need." Cora thought of her meager belongings, the 2 sets of men's clothes, the boots that were falling apart, but asking for things felt dangerous, like admitting she planned to stay. "Maybe thread if I'm to do more leather work." "Make a list. Fabric, too, if you need it." "Can't have you working in—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he was about to say about her clothes. "That is, if you need anything." "I'll make a list." That night, as she lay in the narrow bed listening to the prairie wind, Cora allowed herself to imagine staying. Not forever, she'd learned not to think in forevers, but for a season, maybe 2. Long enough to save money, to let the whispers die down, to figure out where west led when you'd already come this far. She thought about Sawyer's hands on her boots, careful and practical, about Tom Garrett's gruff acceptance, about the leather under her fingers and the satisfaction of making something broken whole again. It wasn't home. She didn't know what home felt like anymore, but it was shelter and work and a locked door, and for now, that was enough. The next morning brought clouds and the smell of more rain. Sawyer left early for town, taking a wagon for supplies. "I'll be back by late afternoon. There's plenty of leather work to keep you busy, or you could start on the house if you're so inclined." After he left, Cora stood in the sitting room doorway, looking at the dust-covered furniture. This felt more invasive than cooking his meals or mending his tack. This was entering the private spaces of his life. But dust was dust, and she'd been hired to help with the house. She started with the windows, letting light into rooms that had been shut up too long. Under the dust sheets, she found good furniture, solid pieces made by craftsmen who understood prairie winters and summer heat. A horsehair sofa that just needed beating clean. A reading chair placed perfectly to catch afternoon light. Small touches that spoke of a home that had once been loved. On the mantel, she found a photograph in a silver frame. A family. Formal and stiff the way old photographs required. A younger Sawyer stood behind a seated woman who must have been his mother, his hand on her shoulder. Her face was kind despite the formal pose. And something about her eyes reminded Cora of her own mother, that mix of strength and gentleness that frontier women learn to balance. By the time she heard the wagon returning, the sitting room was clean, windows gleaming, furniture arranged to catch the light. She'd built a fire in the fireplace to chase away the damp, and the room looked lived in again, welcoming. She was back in the kitchen, working on the leather, when Sawyer came in with his arms full of packages. He stopped in the doorway to the sitting room, packages sliding forgotten to the table. "I'd forgotten," he said quietly, "how it used to look. I hope I didn't overstep." "No." He turned to her, and his eyes were soft with memory. "No, it looks like home again. I'd forgotten that, too." The packages Sawyer had brought from town sat on the kitchen table like wrapped promises. He unpacked them methodically: flour, coffee, salt, the usual staples, but there were other things too. Several spools of sturdy thread in different weights, leather needles, and at the bottom, wrapped in brown paper, a length of dark blue fabric. "Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile said this was practical," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Said it would wear well and, well, she said you'd know what to do with it." Cora touched the fabric. Good wool, tightly woven, the kind that would last through seasons of wear. Enough for a dress, maybe 2. This is too much. It's practical, he repeated, already moving toward the door. Can't have you catch pneumonia wearing wet clothes. Bad for business if my help's laid up sick. He was gone before she could argue, out to tend to evening chores, leaving her with the fabric and a strange tightness in her throat. She couldn't remember the last time someone had bought her something without expecting gratitude to be paid in other ways. Over the next days, a routine established itself. Cora rose before dawn to start breakfast. Sawyer came in from early chores to eat. Then they both went about their work, him on the ranch, her in the house. Evenings were for leather work and quiet conversation, though Sawyer was a man who valued silence as much as words. She learned his preferences without asking coffee black and strong enough to float a horseshoe. Eggs over easy. Biscuits with honey when he was particularly tired. He learned hers too, in his quiet way, leaving the lamp where she could reach it easily, making sure the wood box was full so she wouldn't have to haul logs, never entering her room even to repair the loose window frame. It was the third week when she first ventured to town for supplies. Sawyer offered to go with her, but she knew that would only fuel more gossip. Better to face it alone, establish herself as his hired help. Nothing more or less. The walk was pleasant enough in the spring morning, though her boots were wearing thin and she felt every stone through the soles. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, but also more human. Children played in the dusty street. Women hung washing behind their houses. Men loaded wagons outside the feed store. The general store still smelled of pickle brine and tobacco, and the same stern woman stood behind the counter. Her eyes widened slightly when Cora entered, then narrowed with calculation. "Help you," same tone as before, like the words cost money. "I have a list." Cora placed it on the counter. "For the McKinley Ranch." The woman's eyebrows climbed. "Sawyer hired you on." "Yes, ma'am." "Huh." She studied the list. Then Cora, then the list again. "Heard something about that. Tom Garrett's been telling folks." A pause. "You're the one that was sleeping in his barn." "I was caught by the rain my first night." Cora kept her voice level. "Mister, McKinley was kind enough to offer proper employment." "Kind?" The woman snorted, but began gathering the items. "That's one word for it. Man hasn't had proper help since his mother passed. House probably looks like a disaster." "It's coming along." "Is it now?" The woman added items to the growing pile on the counter. "And you're staying out there alone with him?" "I have a room off the kitchen. I'm hired help, same as any housekeeper. Except most housekeepers don't look like they could wrestle a bull." Cora had heard worse, faced worse. She kept her face calm, counting out the coins Sawyer had given her for supplies. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the store. "Martha Bidwell, you old gossip. Leave the girl alone." A woman emerged from behind the fabric displays, younger than Martha, with laugh lines around green eyes and flour in her dark hair. She wore a work dress and apron, both showing signs of hard use. "Just making conversation. Rose," Martha huffed. "That what you're calling it?" Rose turned to Cora with a smile. "You must be Miss Ellison. Tom Garrett mentioned you when he came by the bakery. Said you do fine leather work." "I do what's needed." "Well, what I need is someone who can patch my husband's work gloves before he wears holes clear through them. Man's harder on leather than a beaver on wood." She tilted her head, studying Cora with friendly curiosity. "Would you consider taking on extra work I can pay fair?" "I'd need to check with Mr. McKinley first." "Of course. I'm Rose Winters. My husband Ben runs the smithy. The bakery's mine, 2 doors down. Come by any time." She gathered her own purchases, then paused. "And don't mind Martha. She'd gossip about the weather if nothing else was happening." After Rose left, Martha finished tallying Cora's purchases in pointed silence. But as Cora gathered the parcels, the older woman spoke again, quieter this time. "The Winters are good people. Rose, especially. She doesn't offer friendship lightly." A pause. "Neither does Sawyer McKinley. For that matter, he's particular about who he lets on his land. It was as close to approval as Cora suspected she'd get. She nodded, balancing the packages. "Thank you, Mrs. Bidwell." "Martha?" the woman corrected grudgingly. "Everybody calls me Martha." The walk back was harder with the supplies, and Cora was grateful when the ranch buildings came into view. Sawyer was working a young horse in the corral, patient and steady, teaching it to accept the saddle. He looked up as she approached, leaving the horse to come help with the packages. How was town? He took the heaviest parcels without asking. Educational. She followed him into the kitchen. Rose Winters asked if I'd do some leather repair for her. I said I'd need to check with you. Rose makes the best bread in 3 counties. He set the packages on the table. Her husband's a good man too. Honest. You want to take the work? If I have time after my duties here. Make time. It's good to have connections in town. Makes you less of a stranger. He started to leave, then turned back. Martha give you trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle. Good. He paused in the doorway. You did well today. Going alone. Shows you're not hiding anything. That night, Cora cut out the pattern for a new dress from the blue fabric. Her hands remembered the skill, even though it had been months since she'd had good material to work with. She'd make it plain but well-fitted, respectable but not fancy. The kind of dress a housekeeper might wear, a woman who earned her place through honest work. Through the kitchen window, she could see Sawyer making his evening rounds, checking gates and water troughs. He moved with the same steady patience he'd shown with the horse, a man comfortable with routine and solitude. But sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her work with something like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe someone else was sharing his space. She understood that feeling. Some days, she couldn't quite believe it either. The next morning brought the first real warmth of spring. Cora had the windows open to air the house when she heard a commotion in the yard, children's voices, high and excited. Through the window, she saw a wagon pulled up near the house, a harried-looking woman trying to manage 3 young children while holding a baby. Sawyer was already there, helping the woman down from the wagon. His face showed the kind of patience reserved for neighbors in need. "I'm so sorry to impose," the woman was saying. "But Ben said you might, that is, he said you had help now who might—" "It's all right, Sarah." Sawyer's voice was calm. "What do you need?" "It's my mother. She's taken ill back in Topeka, and I need to go to her. Ben can't leave the smithy, not with all the spring work, and I can't take the children on such a journey, and—" She stopped, near tears. Cora stepped out onto the porch, understanding the situation immediately. "Mrs. Winters." Sarah Winters looked up, relief flooding her face. "You must be Miss Ellison. I'm sorry to arrive like this, but Rose said she thought maybe—" "How long would you be gone?" "A week, perhaps 2. I can pay—" "Bring them inside," Cora said simply. "We'll work out the details over tea." An hour later, the Winters children were settled in the kitchen, 8-year-old James trying to act grown up, 6-year-old Lucy chattering nonstop, 4-year-old Matthew clinging to his mother's skirts, and baby Ruth sleeping in a basket. Sarah looked near tears again, but from gratitude this time. "I can't thank you enough, both of you. Rose said you were good people, but this—" "It's neighbors helping neighbors," Sawyer said gruffly. "Nothing more than that." After Sarah left in a flurry of instructions and grateful tears, Cora looked at the children now in her care. James was trying to poke his sister with a wooden spoon, while Lucy complained loudly. Matthew had found the cat and was pursuing it determinedly, and the baby was beginning to fuss. "Well," she said, mostly to herself. Sawyer paused at the door, hat in hand. "You all right with this? It's a lot to take on." "I raised my cousins after my aunt died. I can manage." She scooped up the baby with practiced ease. "Though I might not get much leather work done." "The leather can wait." He looked at the chaos in his usually quiet kitchen. and something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "House hasn't had this many children in it since I was young. Mother would have been pleased." He left for his work, and Cora turned to face her temporary charges. "Right then, who wants to help me make cookies?" The day passed in a blur of meals, minor disasters, and the constant energy of children. By evening, Cora had established order chores assigned, schedules set, expectations clear. The children, sensing her natural authority despite her gentle manner, fell into line with only minor rebellions. Sawyer came in for supper to find his table extended with boards and boxes to accommodate everyone. The noise level was considerable: children talking over each other, the baby banging a spoon, Lucy singing a song she'd learned at school. "It's louder than usual," Cora said unnecessarily, settling the baby in her high chair. "It's good noise." He took his place at the head of the table, and Cora noticed how naturally the children accepted his presence. Uncle Sawyer, they called him, though she doubted there was any blood relation. After supper, while Cora wrangled the children through washing and bed preparation, Sawyer sat by the fire with the baby on his lap. Ruth grabbed at his shirt buttons with determined fingers while he held a book steady with one hand, reading aloud to Matthew, who was fighting sleep. The sight did something strange to Cora's chest. This large, quiet man handling the baby with the same gentle competence he showed with skittish horses. When she came to collect Ruth for bed, their hands brushed in the transfer, and neither pulled away as quickly as they might have. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for agreeing to this." "Thank you for taking it on." He stood, towering over her even with her unusual height. "It suits you, all of this." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, just carried the baby to the makeshift nursery she'd created in the room next to hers. But his words stayed with her as she settled the children for the night, as she cleaned the kitchen and prepared for another day of controlled chaos. It suits you, as if she might be more than just passing through, as if she might belong. The children had been with them for 3 days when Cora noticed Sawyer favoring his left shoulder. He tried to hide it, but she'd learned to read the subtle signs of pain, the way he switched hands when lifting, how he rolled the shoulder when he thought no one was watching. "Let me see," she said that evening after the children were asleep. "It's nothing." "It's something if it's affecting your work." She stood with her hands on her hips, and he must have recognized the stance from his mother because he sighed and shrugged out of his shirt. The scars were old but extensive, running from his shoulder blade down across his ribs. Not the clean scars of surgery or even the jagged ones from barbed wire. These had the peculiar pattern of frostbite tissue damaged by cold, healed badly. "Chair," she said simply, and he sat. She heated water on the stove, found clean cloths. The children had taught her many things, including how to tend hurts without making them seem bigger than they were. "I was 17, he said as she worked warm compresses against the scarred muscle. "Full of pride and stupidity. Thought I could make it through a blizzard to check on cattle in the far pasture." "What happened?" "Horse threw me when the wind picked up. Couldn't see 3 feet ahead. Found an old line shack, not much more than a lean-to. Really, stayed there 2 nights while the storm raged." She worked in silence, feeling the tension in the damaged tissue. "How did you survive?" "Burned everything I could find. Fence posts, old boards, even my saddle eventually. When that ran out," he shrugged his good shoulder. "You do what you have to. The cold takes pieces of you. But if you're lucky, it leaves enough behind to keep going." "Someone found you." "My father, 3rd day. I was delirious by then, talking to people who weren't there. He wrapped me in buffalo robes and got me home somehow. Mother spent weeks nursing me back. Said I called out for days, but not for help. Just kept saying I was sorry about the cattle." Cora's hands stilled. She thought of her own nights of cold, of desperate shelter, but they seemed small compared to 2 nights in a blizzard slowly freezing. The scars hurt worse in weather changes. It's bearable. Bearable isn't the same as good. She reached for the liniment she'd found in the medicine cabinet. This might help. He tensed as she began working the oil into the scarred tissue, then gradually relaxed. The kitchen was quiet except for the pop of wood in the stove and the distant sound of Matthew talking in his sleep. "Why didn't you mention it before?" she asked. "Not much to mention. Everyone has scars of some kind." "That's true." She thought of her own not visible on skin, but carried all the same. Still, no shame in tending them. When she finished, he pulled his shirt back on slowly, testing the movement. "Better, thank you. Tomorrow I'll show you exercises that might help. Learned them from a horse doctor. Oddly enough, said muscles are muscles, whether human or horse." He looked up at her with something like amusement. "You're full of surprises. Miss Ellison." "Cora," she corrected. "I think we're past formalities if I'm doctoring your old wounds." "Cora, then." He stood, and they were close in the small kitchen. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "And I'm just Sawyer. The Mr. McKinley makes me look for my father." The moment stretched between them, full of possibilities and impossibilities alike. Then Baby Ruth cried from the other room, and Cora stepped back, the spell broken. "I should—" "Of course." But he caught her hand as she passed, just for a moment. "Thank you, not just for this, for all of it." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and went to tend the baby. The next morning brought Ben Winters to collect his children for a few hours. "Sarah sent a telegram," he explained, bouncing the baby on his hip with practiced ease. "Her mother's improving. She should be home within the week." "They've been wonderful," Cora assured him, which was mostly true if you didn't count Lucy's attempt to give the cat a bath or James's experiment with seeing how many eggs he could juggle. Ben studied her with the frank assessment of a man who worked with his hands and valued competence. "Rose says you're a godsend. Says Sawyer's lucky to have found you." "I'm the lucky one. Work and a roof that's more than many have." "Maybe so." He herded his children toward the wagon. "But Sawyer's been alone too long. House needs more than just cleaning. Needs life in it again." After they left, Cora found Sawyer in the barn working on the old saddle he'd mentioned. His movements were easier today. She noticed with satisfaction. The liniment and exercises must be helping. "Ben take the tribe?" "For a few hours. Said he wanted to give us a break." She picked up a piece of leather, examining the tooling. "This is beautiful work." "My grandfather's came from Germany with this saddle and not much else. Built the ranch from nothing." He ran his hand over the worn leather. "I've been meaning to restore it, but it needs skilled hands. Finer work than I can manage." "May I?" He pushed the saddle toward her, and she examined it with careful fingers. The leather was quality, even aged as it was. The tooling showed scenes she didn't recognize, mountains and forests that looked nothing like the prairie surrounding them. The Black Forest. Sawyer explained. Where he came from. He made this to remember. I think to carry home with him even when home was half a world away. I can restore it. It'll take time, working around everything else. But it can be done. No rush. It's waited this long. He watched her trace the delicate patterns. "You understand about carrying home with you?" "I left everything I knew in Missouri. But maybe that's different. Maybe it's easier when there's nothing worth carrying." "Or harder," he said quietly. "At least my grandfather had good memories worked into leather." "What do you have?" She thought about it. What did she carry? Her mother's thimble, worn smooth. A photograph too creased to make out faces anymore. The knowledge of how to survive alone. How to make herself smaller despite her height. How to read the danger in a man's eyes or the kindness in his hands. "Skills," she said finally. "I carry what I've learned." "That's something. More than some have." He stood, brushing leather dust from his pants. "I should check the fence lines. Storm last week did more damage than I thought." "Your shoulder?" "Is fine. Better than fine." He rolled it experimentally. Whatever you did helped. Thank you." After he left, Cora remained with the saddle, planning the restoration. It would be delicate work, requiring patience and skill, but she had both, and time besides. The children would return soon, bringing their chaos and laughter. But for now, the barn was peaceful, filled with the smell of leather and hay and possibilities. She thought about Sawyer's words, carrying home with you. Perhaps that's what she was doing here, building a new kind of home from the skills she'd carried across the prairie. Not a home of place, but of purpose, of being needed, of belonging earned through work and trust. That afternoon, while the children napped and bread rose in the oven, she began the careful work of cleaning the old saddle. Each tooled design emerged from under years of dirt and neglect, trees she'd never seen, mountains she'd never climbed, memories of someone else's home preserved in leather and skill. As she worked, Sawyer passed by the window, leading a young horse. He moved with the easy confidence of a man on his own land, and something in her chest tightened at the sight. Dangerous, that feeling. She'd learned not to want things she couldn't have, places she couldn't stay. But her hands continued their careful work on another man's memories of home, and she allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine what it might be like to stay long enough to create some of her own. The children returned as the sun was setting, full of stories about their father's workshop and the candy their grandmother Palmer had given them in town. Cora settled them for supper, listening to their chatter with half her attention while the other half tracked Sawyer's movements as he came in from the day's work. "Smells good," he said, washing at the pump. "Pot roast. Lucy helped with the vegetables." She didn't mention that helped meant cutting carrots into wildly uneven pieces and eating half the raw potatoes. "I helped too," Matthew insisted. "You did," Cora agreed. "You kept the baby happy while we cooked." Sawyer took his place at the table, and Lucy immediately began telling him about her day. He listened with grave attention, asking questions that made her beam, watching him with the children. Cora saw another side of him, the man he might have been with a family of his own, if life had bent that way. After supper, while the children played by the fire, Cora showed Sawyer the progress on his grandfather's saddle. "The tooling is even finer than I thought. See here, these are Edelweiss flowers worked into the pattern. Must have taken months to complete." He was a patient man. Had to be, starting over in a new country. Sawyer traced one of the flowers with a careful finger. Never complained, though just worked and built and made a life. A good legacy. Better than some. He straightened. "Speaking of which, Sarah will be back soon. Things will be quieter then." "Yes." She didn't know what else to say. The children had been a buffer of sorts, an excuse for the growing ease between them. "I was thinking," he continued, not quite meeting her eyes, "might be good to have someone from town come regular, for propriety's sake. Rose Winters mentioned her cousin needs work widow with a boy to feed. She could come days, help with the heavy cleaning." Cora understood what he was offering: protection for her reputation, another woman's presence to quiet the gossips. "That's thoughtful." "Practical," he corrected, but there was warmth in his voice. "Can't have my best worker driven off by wagging tongues." That night, after the children were settled and the house quiet, Cora sat by her window working on the blue dress. Nearly finished now. Just the hem to complete. Through the wall, she could hear Sawyer moving in his own room, the creak of floorboards as he prepared for bed. Such strange intimacy, sharing a house with someone, knowing their rhythms, their routines, the way they took their coffee, the sound of their boots on the porch, the particular silence that meant they were thinking deeply about something. She'd have to be careful. It would be too easy to let this temporary arrangement feel permanent, to forget that she was hired help, passing through like the seasons. Too easy to read meaning into kindnesses that might simply be one human being decent to another. But when she picked up the old saddle leather again, running her fingers over another man's memories of home, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to build some memories of her own. Sarah Winters returned on a Tuesday, tearful with gratitude and full of stories about her mother's recovery. The children mobbed her with the fierce joy of the temporarily abandoned, and Cora felt the strange pang of empty arms as she handed over baby Ruth. "I can't thank you enough," Sarah said for the 10th time, pressing a small purse into Cora's hands. Ben said the children were happy as larks. "They were delightful." Cora tried to return the purse. "And Mr. McKinley already—" "That's from me to you, woman to woman. You gave me peace of mind when I needed it most." Sarah glanced around the now quiet kitchen. "I hope they weren't too much trouble." "No trouble at all." After the Winters family departed in a chaos of gathering belongings and forgotten toys, the house seemed to echo with absence. Cora found herself starting to set places for children who weren't there, listening for cries that didn't come. "Strange how quick you get used to noise," Sawyer said, standing in the doorway. "Yes." She busied herself with unnecessary tidying. "I suppose I'll have more time for the leatherwork now." "About that." He moved into the kitchen proper. "I've been thinking. The work you did for the Winters word's getting around. Tom Garrett asked if you could look at some of his tack. And Mrs. Palmer from the Mercantile has some boots that need repair. I don't want to take time from my duties here." "The house hasn't been this well kept in years. Seems to me you could take on extra work if you wanted. Build something for yourself." She looked at him then, trying to read his meaning. "I already have work. Work that won't last forever. Spring roundup's coming, then summer drives. I'll be gone weeks at a time. Makes sense for you to have other income." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Unless you're planning to move on once I'm traveling." The question hung between them, unspoken but clear. Was she staying or going, building a life, or just passing through? "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "Well, think about it. The widow Marsh Rose's cousin, she'll start coming Mondays and Thursdays to help with the heavy work. That'll free you up some if you want to take on repairs for folks." That evening, Cora walked to town to deliver the mended gloves to Rose Winters. The bakery was warm and smelled of yeast and cinnamon, and Rose greeted her like an old friend. "These are perfect," Rose exclaimed, examining the gloves. "Better than new. Ben will be thrilled." She wrapped 2 loaves of bread, still warm from the oven. "For you. And don't argue it's a fair trade." As Cora turned to leave, Rose called after her. "The church social is next Saturday. You should come." "I don't think." "Nonsense. You're part of the community now, whether you realize it or not. Besides," Rose's eyes twinkled, "I heard Sawyer McKinley actually dances when he's prodded enough. Might be worth seeing." Walking home with the bread still warm in her hands, Cora tried to imagine herself at a church social, standing taller than most of the men, weathering the stares and whispers. But then she thought of Rose's easy friendship, of Tom Garrett's respectful nod when she passed, of Martha Bidwell's grudging acceptance. Maybe she was part of the community. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next days, people began bringing their leather goods for repair. First just a few, a bridle here, a pair of boots there. But word spread as it does in small towns, and soon Cora had a steady stream of work. She set up a proper workspace in the corner of the kitchen, organizing her tools and supplies with the same careful attention she gave everything. Widow Marsh arrived on Monday as promised, a thin, nervous woman named Ellen with worried eyes and work-roughened hands. She brought her son, a boy of about 10 named Daniel, who was too thin and too quiet. "I hope it's all right," Ellen said anxiously. "I couldn't find anyone to watch him, and he promises to be no trouble." "Of course it's all right," Cora interrupted gently. "Daniel, have you had breakfast?" The boy shook his head, and Cora set about remedying that while Ellen watched with something like wonder. "Most folks aren't so kind," she murmured. "Most folks haven't been hungry," Cora replied, setting a full plate before the boy. "Eat up. Growing boys need fuel." Ellen proved to be a hard worker, quiet but thorough. She handled the washing and heavy cleaning while Cora worked on leather repairs and kept the household running. Daniel, once fed, revealed a curiosity about the leatherwork, watching Cora's hands with intense focus. "Would you like to learn?" she asked, and his face lit up. "Could I? If your mother approves. Simple things first: how to clean leather, how to hold the tools." By Thursday, a comfortable rhythm had established. Ellen arrived early with Daniel. They shared breakfast, then worked companionably through the morning. Daniel proved to have steady hands and patience, valuable traits for leatherwork. "You're good with him," Ellen said quietly while Daniel practiced saddle soap application in the barn. "His father wasn't. It's nice to see him smile again." Cora understood the weight of unfinished sentences, the things women didn't say about the men who'd disappointed them. "He's a good boy, just needs a chance to prove it." That afternoon, Sawyer returned early from checking the far pastures. He found them all in the kitchen, Ellen kneading bread dough, Daniel working on a piece of scrap leather, Cora teaching him how to make even stitches. The scene was domestic in a way that made him pause in the doorway. "Mr. McKinley," Daniel jumped up. "Miss Cora's teaching me leatherwork." "I see that." Sawyer examined the boy's practice piece. "Good straight lines. Better than my first attempts." Daniel beamed under the praise, and something passed between Sawyer and Cora, an understanding, perhaps, of what this house could be with life in it. Friday brought a surprise visitor. Cora was alone, Ellen not due until Monday, when she heard a horse approaching fast. Through the window, she saw a woman dismounting, elegant, even in traveling clothes, with the kind of beauty that belonged in parlors, not prairie kitchens. The woman knocked imperiously, and Cora opened the door to find herself being examined by sharp blue eyes that took in every detail of her appearance. "You must be the help," the woman said without preamble. "I'm Clarabelle Morrison. I'm here to see Sawyer." "He's working the north pasture, not expected back until evening." Clarabelle's perfect mouth pursed with annoyance. "Then I'll wait." She swept past Cora into the house as if she owned it, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. In the kitchen, Clarabelle removed her gloves with precise movements, taking in the leatherwork on the table, the bread rising on the counter, the general air of comfortable occupation. "How rustic. I suppose Sawyer's still playing rancher." "Would you like tea?" Cora offered, determined to be polite. "If you can manage it." The condescension was sharp as a blade. Cora made tea, using the good china she'd found and cleaned. Clarabelle sipped it with an expression that suggested she was doing Cora a favor by drinking it. "How long have you been employed here?" Clarabelle asked. 2 months. "And you find the work suitable for a woman of your stature?" Cora recognized the game now, the subtle cuts designed to make her feel small despite her height. She'd played it before with Theodore's mother and her circle. "I find honest work always suitable." "How admirably simple." Clarabelle set down her cup. "I knew Sawyer in Denver. We were quite close before I had to return east. Family obligations, you understand, but now I'm free to return to previous attachments." The implication was clear as glass. Cora continued her leatherwork, keeping her hands steady. "I'm sure Mr. McKinley will be pleased to see an old friend." "Oh, I think we were rather more than friends." Clarabelle's smile was sharp. "But then, I suppose a woman in your position wouldn't understand such things." Before Cora could respond, they heard Sawyer's boots on the porch. He entered, dusty from the range, and stopped short at the sight of Clarabelle. "Belle," his voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Darling," Clarabelle rose gracefully. "I've come back, just as we discussed. Though I see you've made some changes." Her gaze flicked dismissively to Cora. "We didn't discuss anything," Sawyer said slowly. "You left 2 years ago. Said ranch life didn't suit you." "A girl can change her mind, can't she?" She moved closer to him, but he stepped back. Cora, this is Miss Morrison, an old acquaintance. The emphasis on acquaintance was subtle but clear. Belle, Miss Ellison is my housekeeper and leather worker. She's brought order to this place. How nice for you. Clarabelle's tone suggested it was anything but. Well, I'm staying at the hotel in town. I thought we could have dinner tomorrow, discuss possibilities. I'm afraid tomorrow's the church social. I've already committed to attending the church social. Clarabelle laughed, a tinkling sound like broken glass. Since when do you attend such provincial gatherings? Since I became part of this community. He moved to stand beside Cora's work table, a positioning that wasn't lost on anyone. If you'll excuse us, Miss Morrison, we have a household to run. Clarabelle's beautiful face flushed. I see. Well, perhaps I misunderstood the situation. She gathered her gloves with sharp movements. Good day, Sawyer, Miss Ellison. After she left, the kitchen felt like a room after a storm charged with unspoken things. Sawyer stood by the window, watching her ride away. Old acquaintance? Cora asked carefully. We courted briefly. She had ideas about changing me, making me into something more suitable for Denver society. When she realized I wouldn't give up the ranch, she left. He turned from the window. I was younger then, foolish enough to think love meant changing who you are. And now? Now I know better. Love should feel like coming home, not leaving it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made her breath catch. About tomorrow, the social, would you go with me as my guest, not my employee? The invitation hung in the air like a question about more than just a dance. Cora thought of all the reasons to say no, the gossip, the stares, the impropriety of it. Then she thought of Clarabelle's dismissive eyes, of Rose's friendship, of this kitchen that had become more home than any place she'd lived. Yes, she said simply. I'll go. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made the prairie look like God's own garden. Cora stood before her small mirror, wearing the blue dress she'd made from Sawyer's fabric. It fit well. She'd always been good at understanding how cloth should drape, even on a frame like hers. The color brought out the green in her hazel eyes, and she'd managed to tame her hair into a simple but elegant style. A knock on her door made her heart jump. The wagon's ready, Sawyer called. She emerged to find him in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that showed his broad shoulders to advantage. He'd shaved carefully and attempted to tame his own dark hair. They stood looking at each other for a moment, both dressed for society rather than ranch work. You look, he paused, seeming to search for words. You look like yourself, only more so. It was an odd compliment, but somehow exactly right. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. He offered his arm, a formal gesture that felt both foreign and natural. Shall we brave the social graces of Dry Hollow? The church stood at the town's center, whitewashed and proud against the evening sky. Already, wagons and horses filled the yard. Music spilled from the open doors, fiddle and piano, and the sound of many voices. Cora felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with facing crowds. We don't have to stay long, Sawyer murmured, seeming to understand. Just make an appearance. But as they entered, something unexpected happened. Rose Winters appeared immediately, radiant in yellow calico. Cora, oh, don't you look wonderful? Come, you must meet everyone properly. And suddenly Cora was being introduced not as the strange tall woman who'd arrived under suspicious circumstances, but as the skilled leather worker who'd saved Tom Garrett's best saddle, who'd minded the Winters children with such care, who made the finest stitches anyone had seen since old Weber died. My boots have never been more comfortable. Mrs. Palmer declared, showing them off to her circle of friends. She's teaching my Daniel a trade, Ellen Marsh added quietly, with the fierce pride of a mother who'd seen too little kindness for her son. The men were equally welcoming in their gruff way. Tom Garrett clapped Sawyer on the shoulder. "Smart man, finding help like that. My Mary says Miss Ellison's got the best hand with leather in 3 counties. Even Martha Bidwell nodded approvingly from her position by the refreshment table. "Decent young woman," she pronounced, which from Martha was practically a declaration of sainthood. As the evening progressed, Cora found herself relaxing. Yes, she was still the tallest woman in the room. Yes, some people stared, but they stared less at her height than at the sight of Sawyer McKinley actually socializing, actually smiling, actually seeming to enjoy himself. "I haven't seen him like this in years," Ben Winters murmured to his wife, not knowing Cora could hear. "Not since his mother passed." The dancing began after supper. Cora hung back, old habits dying hard. She'd learned long ago that dancing was complicated when you were taller than most partners, when leading felt more natural than following. But Sawyer appeared at her elbow. "You promised me a dance." "I promised to attend. I didn't say anything about dancing." "Then I'm asking now." He held out his hand, and there was something in his eyes, a challenge. Maybe, or an understanding. "Trust me." She did. She realized. Somewhere between that first night in the barn and this moment in the church hall, she'd learned to trust this quiet man with his steady hands and patient ways. The fiddles struck up a waltz, and Sawyer led her onto the floor. He was one of the few men present tall enough that she didn't have to slouch or bend. Her hand fit naturally in his, her other hand resting on a shoulder that didn't require reaching down. "I should warn you," she said as they began to move. "I'm not very good at this." "Neither am I. We'll muddle through together." And they did. He was solid and sure, compensating for her uncertainty with gentle pressure and patient guidance. Around them, other couples swirled, but Cora found her awareness narrowing to the warm hand holding hers, the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the way he looked at her like she was exactly where she belonged. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "They're just jealous I'm dancing with the most interesting woman in the room." Interesting, that's one word for it. Beautiful is another. He said it simply, like stating the weather, strong, capable, kind. I could go on. Heat rose in her cheeks. "Sawyer!" "I know. I'm not good with words. Better with actions. But some things need saying." They turned, and she caught sight of Clarabelle Morrison standing by the door, dressed in silk that must have cost more than Cora had seen in her life. She was watching them with narrowed eyes. "Your acquaintance is here," Cora said. Sawyer didn't even turn to look. "She's not my anything. Not anymore. Maybe never was, if I'm honest." The music ended, but he didn't immediately release her. They stood for a moment, hands still clasped, and Cora felt the weight of possibility between them. Then the fiddle struck up a lively reel, and the moment broke. They danced 2 more times that evening, a square dance where their height advantage actually helped, and another waltz near the end of the night. Between dances, Cora found herself surrounded by friendly faces, included in conversations, asked her opinion on everything from leather care to child rearing. "See," Rose said during a quiet moment. "You fit right in. Told you so." But the real test came when Clarabelle approached during the final hour. She swept up in a cloud of perfume and proprietary confidence. "Sawyer, there you are. I was hoping we could talk." She barely glanced at Cora. "Privately. Anything you need to say can be said here." Sawyer replied calmly. Clarabelle's perfect composure cracked slightly. "Really, darling, this is hardly the place." "I'm not your darling." His voice was still calm, but firm. "I wasn't 2 years ago when you left, and I'm not now." "I made a mistake. I see that now. But surely—" "Belle." He stopped her gently but firmly. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. We wanted different things then, and we still do. I wish you well, but not with me." Clarabelle's gaze finally landed fully on Cora, taking in the blue dress, the work-roughened hands, the way Sawyer stood slightly protective beside her. I see. Well, I suppose I should have expected as much. She managed a brittle smile. You always did prefer function over beauty. I prefer honesty over artifice. Sawyer corrected. Strength over decoration? Someone who sees a ranch as a home, not a prison. The words hung in the air, and Cora felt them like physical things, warming her chest. Clarabelle lifted her chin, turned on her expensive heel, and walked away. This time, Cora knew she wouldn't be back. That was hard, Cora said quietly. No, Sawyer replied, watching Clarabelle leave. That was overdue. This, he gestured to the hall, the community, her beside him. This is what's hard. Building something real, making a place for yourself, opening your home and your life. Is that what we're doing? Building something? He turned to her then, and his eyes were warm and certain. I'd like to be, if you're willing. Before she could answer, the musicians announced the last dance. Sawyer held out his hand again, and Cora took it. This time when they danced, she didn't think about her height or her past or the uncertainties of tomorrow. She just let herself be held by a good man in a room full of neighbors who'd decided she belonged. The ride home was quiet, the wagon rolling through darkness lit by stars. Cora sat beside Sawyer on the bench, not quite touching but aware of every inch between them. Thank you, she said finally. For tonight, for asking me. Thank you for saying yes. He guided the horses with easy competence. I know it wasn't easy, facing all those people. It was easier than I expected. They were kind. Most folks are given the chance. You just have to give them the chance. He paused. And yourself the chance, too. They pulled into the ranch yard, and he helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist, and they stood close in the moonlight. Cora, he began, then seemed to lose his words. I know, she said softly. Me too, but slowly I've made mistakes before. Trusted too quickly. As slow as you need. He stepped back, but his eyes held promises. I'm not going anywhere. Ranch isn't going anywhere. Take your time figuring out if this is home. Inside, Cora hung up the blue dress carefully. Through her window, she could see Sawyer in the barn, tending the horses with the same patient care he brought to everything. She thought about Clarabelle's words, function over beauty. But Clarabelle had it wrong. There was beauty in function, in the way Sawyer's hands gentled a spooked horse, in the solid walls of this house that kept out the prairie wind, in work that mattered and people who noticed. She was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where being tall and strong and capable wasn't a liability but an asset, where she could build something lasting with her own hands and heart. Home, she was learning, wasn't about where you came from. It was about where you chose to stay. The storm came 3 days after the social, rolling across the prairie like God's own fury. Cora woke to the sound of wind trying to tear the roof off and rain hitting the windows sideways. Through the wall, she could hear Sawyer already moving, the urgent rhythm of a rancher who knew what prairie storms could do. She dressed quickly and found him in the kitchen, pulling on his oilcloth coat. Stock needs securing, he said without preamble. This one's going to be bad. I'll help. He started to protest, then seemed to see something in her face that stopped him. The horses in the near pasture need bringing in. Can you handle that while I check the cattle? She could and did. The wind tried to knock her down the moment she stepped outside, but her height and strength served her well. She fought her way to the pasture, caught the leads of the spooked horses, and guided them to the barn. They followed her readily, seeming to sense she knew what she was doing. By the time she had them secured, she was soaked through despite the oilcloth. The storm was worsening, lightning splitting the sky in brilliant forks. Through the barn door, she saw Sawyer struggling with a gate that had come loose, the wind threatening to tear it completely free. Without thinking, she ran to help. Together they wrestled the gate back into position, her strength matching his as they fought the wind. He shot her a look of grateful surprise, then pointed toward a group of cattle huddled against a failing fence section. They worked without words, knowing instinctively what needed doing. Cora had helped her uncle with livestock enough to understand the basics, keep them calm, give them direction. Don't let panic spread. She took one side while Sawyer took the other, and together they herded the cattle to safety. It took hours. By the time they stumbled back into the kitchen, both were exhausted, soaked, and splattered with mud. But the stock was safe, the property secured as much as possible against the storm's rage. "Sit," Cora ordered, already reaching for towels. "You're shivering." "So are you." But he sat, letting her pull off his boots while he worked at the buttons of his sodden coat with numb fingers. She built up the fire, set water to heat, found dry clothes for both of them. It should have felt improper, this domestic intimacy, this caretaking of each other. But propriety seemed foolish when set against the simple need for warmth and dry clothes. When they were both changed and warming by the stove, cups of hot coffee in their hands, Sawyer finally spoke. "You were incredible out there. I couldn't have managed alone." "You would have found a way. Maybe. But having you there made it possible. Not just manageable." He studied her over his coffee cup. "Most people would have stayed inside, safe and dry. Most people haven't spent nights in barns and under wagons." She met his eyes steadily. "I know what it's like to have everything you own at risk. If you can help, you help." The storm raged through the night. They dozed in chairs by the stove, taking turns checking the windows, making sure nothing else had come loose. It was nearly dawn when the wind finally began to die, leaving an eerie quiet in its wake. Sawyer stood stiffly, stretching muscles that had cramped from sleeping upright. "I should check the damage." "We should check the damage," Cora corrected. "And we should eat first. Can't work on empty stomachs." She made a quick meal while he tended the stove. They ate in companionable silence, both knowing the storm had shifted something between them. Working together through crisis had a way of stripping away pretense, leaving only truth behind. The damage, when they surveyed it, was significant but not catastrophic. Fences down, part of a shed roof gone, debris everywhere. But the house stood strong. The barn had held, and they hadn't lost any stock. "Could have been worse," Sawyer said, already calculating the work needed. "Could have been much worse," Cora agreed. Then, because it needed saying, "I imagine Miss Morrison is glad she wasn't here for this." He actually smiled at that. Belle would have locked herself in her room at the first thunderclap. She wasn't made for this life. He turned to look at her directly. "You are, though, whether you were born to it or not. You're made for this." They spent the next days cleaning up, repairing damage. Ellen Marsh came to spite the mud, bringing Daniel, who proved surprisingly helpful. Tom Garrett rode over with several hands to help with the heavier work. Rose brought food and gossip in equal measure. "Whole town's talking about how you two saved the McKinley stock," she told Cora while they served lunch to the workers. "Martha Bidwell says she's never seen anything like it. A woman working cattle in a storm like that was man's work." "Work is work," Cora replied. "Doesn't matter who does it as long as it gets done." That's what Sawyer said when Ben asked him about it. Rose's eyes twinkled. "Said you were the best partner he could ask for. Made it real clear he meant in all things, not just storm wrangling." Cora felt heat rise in her cheeks. He was being kind. Sawyer McKinley doesn't do kind. He does honest. Rose squeezed her arm. "The man's been alone so long. Some of us thought he'd forgotten how to be otherwise. Then you show up, and suddenly he's dancing at socials and calling you partner in front of half the town." That evening, after the helpers had gone home and Ellen had taken Daniel back to town, Cora found Sawyer on the porch, watching the sunset paint the storm-washed sky. "Sit with me," he asked. She sat, aware of him beside her, of the quiet that had settled over the ranch. The air smelled clean, the way it only did after storms. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what this place needs. Not just repairs from the storm, but improvements. That shed that lost its roof might be better to build a proper workshop there. For your leather work. Give you space to take on bigger projects." "That's a lot of expense for hired help." He turned to her then, and his eyes were serious. "You're not hired help. Haven't been for a while now. I don't have the right word. Partner, maybe. But that sounds like business." "What doesn't sound like business?" He was quiet for a long moment. "When I was out in that storm, all I could think about was making sure you were safe. Then you were there beside me, strong and capable and unafraid. And I realized something. I've been alone so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone beside me, really beside me, not just present." Cora's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. "Sawyer!" "I know we said slow. I'm not pushing. But I need you to know this is your home if you want it. For as long as you want it. Not as hired help, not as a housekeeper, but as whatever you want to be. The workshop, the leather business, all of it, we can build it together." She thought of all the places she'd left, all the doors closed to her, all the times she'd been too tall, too strong, too much. Then she thought of this man who saw her height as an advantage, her strength as an asset, her presence as a gift rather than a burden. "I want to stay," she said simply. "I want to build something here, with you." His hand found hers on the bench between them, work-rough fingers interlacing with hers. "Then we will, together." They sat as the stars came out, hands linked, watching the land that had tried to defeat them and failed. Tomorrow would bring more work fences to mend, buildings to repair or improve. But tonight, there was the two of them on a porch they'd both fought to protect, planning a future neither had imagined but both were choosing. Later, as Cora prepared for bed, she found mud still caked in her hair, bruises on her arms from wrestling gaits and calming horses. In the mirror, she saw a woman who looked nothing like the one who'd stepped off a wagon months ago, lost and alone. This woman looked like she belonged somewhere, like she'd found her place. Through the window, she could see a light in the barn, Sawyer doing final checks, making sure everything was secure. He'd probably done the same thing every night for years, alone. But now he had someone who understood why it mattered, who'd stand beside him in storms both literal and figurative. She thought of Clarabelle's perfect beauty, of Theodore's dismissal, of all the people who'd found her wanting. They seemed very far away now, like characters in someone else's story. This was her story, the storm, the work, the man who saw her truly, the community that had decided she belonged. Home, she was learning, wasn't just where you chose to stay. It was where you chose to stand and fight when the storms came, where someone stood beside you, not because they had to, but because there was nowhere else they'd rather be. Tomorrow, Ellen would come, and there would be breakfast to make and leather to work and a ranch to help run. But tonight, Cora fell asleep to the sound of familiar footsteps on the porch, the door closing gently. The small sounds of someone else making a home in the same place she was. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring, carried by a rider who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Cora was teaching Daniel how to tool leather when the man approached the house, his horse lathered with hard riding. "Looking for a Miss Cora Ellison," he said, eyeing her warily. "Got a letter from Missouri. Paid extra to make sure it found you." Cora's hand stilled on the leather. Missouri. She'd left no forwarding address, told no one where she was going. "I'm Cora Ellison." The rider handed over the letter and left quickly, as if bad news might be contagious. Cora recognized the handwriting immediately. Theodore's mother, Mrs. Victoria Hartwell. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "Miss Ellison." The letter began in Mrs. Hartwell's precise script. It has come to my attention through mutual acquaintances that you have settled in Dry Hollow. I write with news that may be of interest to you. My son Theodore has taken gravely ill with lung fever. The doctors are not hopeful. In his delirium, he has called for you repeatedly. He wishes to make amends for how matters ended between you. As his mother, I am begging you to come. Whatever our past differences, my son deserves peace before the end. I have enclosed funds for travel. Please come quickly. Time is short. Cora read the letter twice, then sat heavily on the porch step. Daniel, sensing something wrong, quietly gathered his work and went to find his mother in the house. That's how Sawyer found her when he came in for the noon meal, sitting still as stone. Letter clutched in her hands. What's happened? He crouched beside her, dusty from morning work but fully present. She handed him the letter wordlessly. He read it, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. You're going. It wasn't a question. I don't know. The words came out raw. He hurt me. His family hurt me. They made me feel like I was wrong for existing as I am. But you loved him once. I thought I did. Maybe I just loved the idea of being chosen, of fitting into someone's life. She looked up at Sawyer. I don't love him now. What I feel for him is nothing, not anger anymore, not hurt, just nothing. Then why consider going? She thought about it, tried to find words for the complicated knot in her chest. Because I'm not them. I'm not someone who ignores suffering because it's inconvenient. And because I need to see that life one more time. To know for certain that this, she gestured to the ranch, to him, to the life they were building. This is what I choose. Sawyer was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, offering her his hand. Then we'd better get you packed. Next eastbound stage leaves tomorrow morning. You don't think I'm letting you face that alone, do you? His voice was matter-of-fact. Ranch can survive without me for a week. Tom Garrett owes me about a dozen favors he can have his boys check the stock. Sawyer, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, but partners stand together, especially when facing the past. He pulled her to her feet. Besides, I'm curious to see what kind of fool would let you go. That evening, they made preparations. Ellen assured them she could handle the household needs. Tom Garrett, true to Sawyer's prediction, immediately agreed to help with the ranch. Rose insisted on packing food for the journey and extracted a promise that Cora would write. You show them, Rose said fiercely, hugging Cora tight. Show them what they threw away. Show them who you've become. The journey took 4 days' stage to the railroad. Then the train east. Sawyer had never been farther east than Denver, and he watched the changing landscape with interest. But mostly he watched Cora, saw how she grew quieter with each mile, how her shoulders began to hunch as if trying to make herself smaller. Stop that, he said gently on the 3rd day. As Missouri approached, Stop what? Shrinking. You're remembering who they wanted you to be instead of who you are. She straightened deliberately. Old habits. Bad habits. He touched her hand briefly. You're Cora Ellison, who saved my cattle in a storm, who teaches leatherwork to a boy everyone else ignored, who made my empty house a home. Don't let them make you forget that. Jefferson City hadn't changed much. The same broad streets, the same imposing buildings, the same sense of propriety that hung in the air like humidity. Cora felt it settling on her skin like an unwelcome film. The Hartwell house stood exactly as she remembered 3 stories of red brick respectability, windows gleaming with judgment. Sawyer whistled low. Fancy? Stifling, Cora corrected. Like living in a museum where you're always afraid to touch anything. The maid who answered the door gasped when she saw Cora. Miss Ellison, oh, thank heavens. Mrs. Hartwell is beside herself. Mr. Theodore, he's been asking. They were ushered quickly upstairs, past portraits of stern Hartwell ancestors and furniture that valued form over comfort. Mrs. Victoria Hartwell waited outside Theodore's room, and Cora was shocked at the change in her. The imperious woman who'd once declared Cora unsuitable looked haggard, aged by worry. "You came," she breathed, then seemed to notice Sawyer. Her eyes took in his height, his broad shoulders, the protective way he stood beside Cora. "My business partner, Mr. McKinley," Cora said simply. "He was kind enough to escort me." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes sharpened with interest, but worry quickly overwhelmed curiosity. "Theodore he's very weak. The fever broke yesterday, but the doctors say his lungs." She pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "He keeps saying he needs to tell you something, to apologize." Cora steeled herself and entered the sick room. Theodore lay propped on pillows, a shadow of the robust man who'd once criticized her appearance. His eyes, when they found her, filled with tears. "Cora," her name came out as a whisper. "You came." "I came." She sat carefully in the chair beside his bed, aware of Sawyer taking position near the door, present but not intrusive. "I was wrong." Theodore's words came in gasps, each breath an effort. "About you, about everything. Mother said, society said, but I was a coward. You were magnificent, and I was too small to see it." "Theodore, no, let me say this." He struggled to sit up straighter. "I've lain here thinking about chances missed, about the life we could have had if I'd been brave enough to love you as you were instead of trying to change you." "We wanted different things," Cora said gently. "It wouldn't have worked. Because I couldn't see past what others thought." His gaze moved to Sawyer. "Your partner. He sees you truly." "He does." "Good, good." Theodore fell back against the pillows. "I needed to tell you. You deserve better than I gave. You deserved someone who saw strength where I saw impediment, beauty where I saw difference." Cora felt the last of her old hurt dissolve. "I forgive you, Theodore. Be at peace." He smiled then, the ghost of the charming man he'd been. I think I can now." They stayed for 3 more days, until Theodore's crisis passed and the doctors declared him on the mend. During that time, Cora found herself showing Sawyer her old world, the shops where she'd been made to feel too large, the church where whispers had followed her, the park where Theodore had ended their engagement. "I can see why you left," Sawyer said as they walked past manicured gardens that felt artificial after the wild beauty of the prairie. "This place wants everyone to fit in the same small box." "I tried for so long to make myself fit." They paused by a fountain where she'd once cried after another social slight. "Tried to be smaller, quieter, less myself." "Their loss," he said simply. "Our gain." On their last day, Mrs. Hartwell invited them for tea. She served it in delicate china cups that looked comically small in Sawyer's hands, but he managed with grave dignity. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Hartwell said stiffly. "I was unkind. I thought I knew what was best for my son, what was proper for society. I see now that I was wrong." "We can't change the past," Cora replied. "We can only choose better going forward." Mrs. Hartwell studied them both, Cora sitting tall and unashamed, Sawyer solid and protective beside her. "You've found your place." "I have." "And you're happy." "More than I ever thought possible." The older woman nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad and grateful for coming when we needed you. You didn't owe us that kindness." As their train pulled away from Jefferson City, Cora felt something shift and settle inside her chest. The past was finished now, truly finished. She'd faced it, forgiven it, and chosen her future with clear eyes. "Thank you," she said to Sawyer as Missouri faded behind them. "For coming with me, for standing beside me." "Always," he said simply. "That's what partners do." She leaned against his shoulder, not caring who might see or judge. Let them look, let them whisper. She was Cora Ellison, leather worker and ranch woman, tall and strong and finally, fully herself. She was going home not to the place she'd been born, but to the place she'd chosen, where a community waited that saw her worth, where work mattered more than whispers, where love had room to grow as vast as the prairie sky. The train carried them west, toward sunset and home, and Cora couldn't stop smiling. The first breath of spring came early that year, carrying the scent of new grass and possibility. Cora stood in the doorway of the workshop Sawyer had built over the winter, a proper space for her leather work, with good light and sturdy tables. Orders had been coming steadily from 3 counties over, her reputation spreading like prairie fire. "Package for you." Ellen called from the main house. She'd become more friend than help these days, though she still insisted on coming twice a week. Daniel was with her, now skilled enough to handle simple repairs on his own. The package bore Rose's bakery mark. Inside, Cora found fresh bread, preserves, and a note. "For the celebration tonight, the whole town's talking about it. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Tonight. Cora's hand went to the simple gold ring on her finger, still new enough to surprise her when sunlight caught it. 3 weeks married, and she still sometimes couldn't believe it was real. Sawyer appeared in the workshop doorway, sleeves rolled up, a smile playing at his lips. "Nervous? About a barn dance after everything else we've faced." But yes, she was nervous. This was their official wedding celebration, delayed until spring when folks could travel easier, when the ranch could host properly. "It's different," he said, understanding as always. "This is us standing up in front of everyone and saying this is who we are, together. No more hiding, no more Miss Ellison the housekeeper. Mrs. McKinley, the partner, in all things." He crossed to her, and even after months together, her heart still skipped when he was near, having second thoughts. Never. She meant it. Their quiet wedding in Rose's parlor, witnessed by true friends, had been perfect. But this was their declaration to the wider world. By evening, the ranch was transformed. Lanterns hung from every post and beam. Tables groaned with food brought by neighbors. And Tom Garrett's fiddle was already warming up in the barn. People arrived in steady streams, some Cora knew well. Others she'd only seen in passing. "Look at this place," Martha Bidwell declared, resplendent in her best Sunday dress. "Never thought I'd see the McKinley Ranch so alive again. Does a body good." Even the doubters came, curiosity overcoming propriety. They watched Cora greet guests, noted how she moved with confident grace despite her height, saw how Sawyer looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "Beautiful ceremony 3 weeks ago," Ben Winters said, pumping Sawyer's hand. "Though I still say you should have let me make a proper wedding arch." "Cora wanted simple," Sawyer replied, his arm naturally finding its way around her waist. "I wanted what made her happy." The dancing began as sunset painted the sky. This time, when Sawyer led her onto the floor, Cora felt no hesitation. She belonged here, in his arms, in this community, in this life they'd built from storm damage and leatherwork and quiet understanding. "Remember the first time we danced," he murmured as they moved together. "I was terrified everyone would stare." "They did stare. They're staring now." He spun her gently. "Different reasons, though." He was right. The looks now held warmth, approval, even envy. Several young women watched with sighs as Sawyer guided her through the steps, tall and strong and utterly devoted. Midway through the evening, Tom Garrett called for quiet. "Got something to say," he announced, raising his glass. "When Sawyer McKinley first brought Miss Cora on." Some of us wondered. Bachelor rancher, mysterious woman, unusual circumstances. But I've watched these two build something real. Watched them stand together through storms, face down the past, choose each other every day. That's what marriage is, not the ceremony, but the choosing. So here's to the McKinleys. May your roots grow deep as prairie grass and your love weather every storm. The toast was echoed throughout the barn, and Cora felt tears prick her eyes. Acceptance, belonging, home, everything she'd searched for across dusty miles and cold nights. Later, as the party continued around them, she and Sawyer found themselves on the porch, taking a moment of quiet. The house glowed behind them, full of light and laughter. Before them stretched their land, their future, their life together. "No regrets?" Sawyer asked. "How could I regret finding home?" She leaned into his warmth. "Finding you." "I meant about the party, but that's a better answer." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I have one regret." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "That I didn't go check the barn that first night, didn't find you sooner. Think of all the time we could have had." "We have time now," she said. "Years and years of it." "A lifetime." He agreed. Daniel appeared, tugging at Cora's skirt. "Mrs. McKinley Ma says to tell you Mrs. Palmer wants to see your workshop. She's got a special order to discuss." "Mrs. McKinley?" The name still felt new but right, like boots that needed breaking in but fit perfectly. "Tell her I'll be right there." The boy ran off, and Sawyer chuckled. "Back to work already." "Work is part of who I am. You knew that when you married me." "I did. Loved that about you from the start. Well, that and the way you made biscuits." She laughed, swatting at him playfully. "Is that all I am? A tall woman who can cook and mend leather?" "You're everything," he said simply. "My partner, my wife, my home, the woman who chose to sleep in my barn and changed my whole life." "Our lives," she corrected. "You changed mine too, gave me a place to grow roots." "We gave each other that." Rose appeared in the doorway, beaming. "You two can't hide out here all night? This is your party. Besides, Cora, I've got 3 women in there wanting to know if you'll teach leatherworking classes. Seems your skills are in demand." As they returned to their guests, Cora marveled at the transformation. The barn where she'd once sought desperate shelter now rang with celebration. The kitchen where she'd first eaten Sawyer's offered meal now overflowed with neighbors who'd become family. The house that had stood empty of warmth now radiated it from every window. "Thank you," she whispered to Sawyer as they rejoined the dance. "For what?" "For the lamp that first night, for opening your door." "Thank you for walking through it," he replied, "for choosing to stay." The stars wheeled overhead, the same ones that had witnessed her arrival in Dry Hollow, desperate, alone. Sure she'd never find a place to belong. Now they shone down on a woman who'd found everything she'd never dared hope for, work that mattered, a community that valued her, and a love that saw her true worth. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to thrill. "My gentle giant who gave me shelter and so much more." "I love you," he replied, "my strong, capable woman who made my house a home." They danced until the lanterns burned low, surrounded by friends who'd become family, on land that had become theirs together. When the last guest finally left and the night grew quiet, they stood hand in hand looking at what they'd built. A ranch that prospered, a workshop that served the community, a home that welcomed all who needed shelter just as Sawyer had once welcomed a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. "No more barn sleeping for you," Sawyer said, leading her toward their house. "You've got a proper bed now, a proper home." "The best home," Cora agreed, "because it has you in it." As they walked together toward their front door, their home, their future, Cora thought about all the miles she'd traveled to get here. Every hardship, every cold night, every closed door had led her to this moment, to this man who'd offered her shelter and given her his heart, to this place where being tall and strong was an asset, not a liability, to this life where she could be fully, authentically herself. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night but holding in the warmth. Through the windows, their land stretched endlessly under starlight, the same stars. the same prairie, but everything transformed by love and belonging and the simple miracle of finding where you're meant to be. Home. Not just a word anymore, but a truth lived out in every sunrise shared over coffee, every evening spent in comfortable silence, every storm weathered side by side. Cora McKinley had found her place in the world, and it was here in a ranch house on the prairie with a man who saw her truly, in a community that valued her contributions, in a life built on strength and kindness and the courage to walk through an open door. The lamp in the window still burned, just as Sawyer always left it, a beacon for anyone who might need shelter, just as she once had. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life begin with the simplest acts of kindness, a barn door left open, a lamp to light the way, and a heart willing to make room for love. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts about Cora and Sawyer's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and finding home in the Old West.